Cool. So yeah, so there's some.
So you were talking about two different kinds of consciousness, right? So one is life doing its thing, and
one is like consciousness, like live doing its reorganization, twiddling thing. Like, hey, what if we tweak this parameter here? What if we get up involved? But the other is like even being aware in a more kind of ongoing or reflective sense of the process of reorganization. It's like, oh, my system concepts came from somewhere, right?
Yeah, so
even if you didn't know how, there's still this sense of, oh, something created those.
It's like a meta level, right? On the other type of reorganization, there's this knowing that something is going on and reorganizing and being built, perhaps.
Yeah, and so even if it is happening unconsciously in the moment, there could still be like, there's still a difference between someone who has a sense of, you know, oh, here's where my system concepts came from versus somebody who's like, you know, no, like this paradigm is just correct, clearly, or something. I don't know. I mean, usually people don't even say that, and there is yet a difference between somebody who, you know, read a couple arguments for, you know, some particular political theory and then, you know, came to agree with it, right? And like they have like principled reasons why they came to agree with something, but rationality is sort of a couple levels further down, right? Like you can't rationalize your way into a paradigm.
No, it needs to be built up from the bottom to the top, right? No, I don't know, if you are not in a paradigm and you get into another paradigm. Well, this happened to me with PCT because I didn't have that paradigm before. I came from psychology, mainstream psychology, cognitive behavioral paradigm, which was a messy kind of paradigm. So I noticed when you read Power's work, and he does this very neatly, you get to build all the stepping stones of the paradigm, right? So I have the idea of perception, the idea of control, the idea of how it's all connected and the levels. So that's how a new paradigm is constructed. But I cannot offer someone this paradigm and no one can take it from me, right? It's it needs to be done somehow.
Yeah, it's part of the very organization of the system.
To have a to be part of a paradigm.
Yeah. It's the whole system is organized around that in some way. And you know, you can though, you know, you don't lose everything else that you know when you like, you know, started learning PCT, you know, in addition to whatever other like psychological stuff, you know, it's like that stuff didn't go away, but it gets kind of reorganized in light of this new higher concept.
And I also have a sense like there's a different perspective. Like I have the PCT world is like here, and then I can sort of look back. Well, there's this idea that I used to have.
You bringing up CBT is also reminding me of something I've been exploring recently, which is the emotional coherence framework and coherence therapy. Are you familiar with those?
No, but please quickly explain it.
Yeah. So I'm going to send you a link. You know how, you know, periodically somebody sets out to figure out why therapy works when it works and doesn't work when it doesn't work, you know, like what's really going on there? Like, you know, Gendlin did this in the 70s and like, you know, people do this every so often. So, you know, some folks set out to do this once again. And what they found was in order to have deep therapeutic change, as opposed to what they call counteractive change, which is where, you know, and I'm sure, you know, with the PCT map, you can just immediately see what counteractive change is trying to be.
Yeah, it's like a new conflict.
Yeah, you're like, I'll just win the conflict.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how CBT works sometimes at least.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
So instead of trying to just win a conflict, or make a new conflict with some new behavior that's trying to fight the old, which is fundamentally, I don't know if there's a word for this in the original PCT language, but it's fundamentally trying to control your own behavior, as opposed to, untangling the stuff that's in conflict and, focusing on the perceptions that you're wanting.
I think we often use coercion, but that's more interpersonal, but you could also do this.
Yeah, self-coercion
yourself
as well. Yeah. That's a word that I've used and that I've seen a bunch of other people use, but I wasn't sure if that word kind of came up in the PCT world, because I mean, I subscribed to the mailing list like years ago, but there was too much activity on it and I was overwhelmed with my email. So I'm still on it, but they all just get automatically archived. So sometimes I still come across stuff when I'm like searching something. I'll be like, oh, hey, the PCT folks said something about this, but
we now have got a forum with more control. Yeah, I think you saw the forum as well. Maybe.
Oh yeah. I haven't dove into it, but that's really cool, because then
so the mailing list is replaced by a forum with more control options, but still people fight in awful ways. So it didn't solve all the problems. But what was it with the emotion coherence?
Right. So they also have so the basic thing they came to was basically, instead of trying to fight the conflict, you need to find out what sense it is making to already be doing the thing that you're doing that you think is bad. Mm-hmm. Which is structurally like extremely compatible with perceptual control theory, right? Like it's sort of just, yes, of course that's what you have to do.
All behavior is control of perception. So what perception is controlled, right? So you need to go find that out.
Exactly. And so the coherence therapy folks have a bunch of techniques for doing this, and some of the language that they use for it is they'll say things like all perception, or all behavior, or all symptoms, because they're talking in a sort of therapist context, are coherent, like they're generated from some emotionally coherent schema, basically. And it's like what they're talking about is some level of control system, basically, right? Like that is saying it is necessary to have this behavior.
Yeah, if you feel unsafe, you'll do anything to make you feel safe, and this leads to aggression sometimes, and whatever is needed, right? So that's
Well, you'll do anything to feel safe, but also you'll do the sort of things that have worked before to feel safe first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If those don't work, then you'll do other things, and you'll like keep trying other stuff, subject to all the other constraints that your other control systems are imposing on the patient.
But you don't do those things you did before because they are reinforced. It's just that's what that control system
learned
does.
It's
the easiest level of control, just to stick with not with the behavior, but with the perceptions that.
Right, just to like, if I want to snap my fingers, like that just happens. There's no reorganization needed to snap my fingers.
No, until it doesn't work anymore because you broke your nail or something, and then you'll find a new way.
But I had to learn how to do that, right? Like you're not born knowing how to snap your fingers. So that's a really great example of such a skill.
Yeah. So what's the point with mentioning the therapy?
Yeah, so I mean, they explicitly contrast not just their approach, but like they basically classify any approach into counteractive or transformational. And and approaches can be kind of a mix of these, like they're not purely one or the other. You'll have things that do some amount of saying, oh, try this new thing even though you don't want to, but also like notice what the resistance is that comes up, right? Like, there's space for small amounts of just trying new stuff, right? Because sometimes it'll work. And then, oh, hey, it worked. Like, and then that, can produce its own reorganization, right? Because if you can do something that sort of conflicts with some relatively loosely held control system and it produces this really solid solution, then it's like the other thing might be happy to just kind of let go. It's like, oh, okay, I guess we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, then what, right? And that's where you get into, ongoingly fighting yourself, trying to maintain some new behavior that you think is better than your other behavior.
Yeah. This sounds so tiring.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, and that's one of the things I love about PCTs. I recently did a podcast interview, which I'll send it to you when it comes out, because I spend probably half an hour on the podcast interview laying out PCT and explaining my understanding of it and introducing it, saying what I see the implications as being and stuff like that. And when I introduce it, I always, I start with a thermostat, and then I use this analogy, which I think has been used in books, but I've at least sort of regenerated the whole thing on my own just by thinking about it. I studied engineering. I actually did, I had a class on control systems. So I don't really know it very well, but it's certainly familiar to me. And so, I can just reason about how the things
feel
work.
Secure enough to just talk about it then.
Yeah. And so I'm always talking about, like, imagine that you have a furnace with a thermostat set to 24 degrees Celsius and a air conditioning unit with the thermostat set to 20 degrees Celsius. Like, what happens, right? And I just get people to think about it, and people will notice different parts of it. Sometimes they go straight to like some sort of oscillation, but people often don't realize that what this means is that both of them are running full tilt. That the amount of energy being expended is literally as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And almost nobody realizes that it makes the system unable to control for perturbations in the middle. Like, that's just a really that's sort of a really non-obvious point about it.
Can you explain that? What?
Well, so it's like, if they're both already running full tilt, like say that the temperature is at 22 degrees, halfway in the middle, and then you open the door and there's a draft and it drifts down to 21. Well, there's no way to pull it back up to 22 because both the furnace and the air conditioning are just already running.
High.
They're already just doing as much as they can. It might eventually.
So any disturbance will just impact the system.
Yeah, it's completely, there's completely no control within this conflicted range.
Yeah.
And then if it disturbs enough that it swings low or swings high, then that's when you get the oscillations, right? Because
then one side wins, but then the other side's taking back control.
Right, and then they kind of go back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh, another piece that
that's nice. I haven't seen this example with both the cooler and the furnace in the same room. And this middle thing, because I have this idea as some kind of sense. I could think of it, but I haven't heard it explained like this clear. It's great. Yeah.
I think I read something like that, maybe in the last chapter of BCP. Because there's definitely he does talk, like, I wouldn't have noticed myself the thing about how when you're in the middle range you can't control it, but Powers definitely names that in the last chapter of BCP. And
the middle range is everything in between those settings, right? It's a large middle range.
What do you mean?
So the fact is that the temperature in the room cannot be controlled by either system anymore.
Yeah.
And
that's something to kind of, there's this great quote that's like, a good compromise is when everybody is somewhat dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And it's like PCT just sort of makes it really clear that, like, what that means is that everybody is going to be still fighting. It's like, if everybody's slightly dissatisfied, they're all going to be, and so the thing is still going to, like, sure, maybe you got it balanced in the middle for a moment, but like everybody's wasting a ton of energy trying to move it.
Yeah. Does it makes it sound like a really bad idea to compromise, right? It's no solution.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't want to compromise like your your computer password, right? Like if a system becomes compromised,
yeah,
like, that's really bad.
it has a different sound in English. So I'm from the Netherlands,
Right, right, yeah.
and I think it's a cultural thing to believe compromise is a good thing. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. The politics make a culture out of compromising. Yeah, like meeting each other in the middle. That's what it means here. But it leaves this situation. Everyone has its say, but no one gets what they want. Yeah.
So are you saying that you think the Netherlands think compromise is less bad, or
It's less bad. Well, they have this. We have this word polder. It's the land that's one back from the sea. I don't know the English word for this. Polder. It's like it used to be sea, and then it turned into land. That's what we call.
Oh yeah, I think I know what you mean. I mean, this is central to the name Netherlands.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. So it's land one back from the sea, and so political discussions are it's made into a verb, to polder, and it means that every party involved can have its can say what they want, and the solution lies somewhere in the middle. Yeah, but it's not transcendental in any way. Our politics are not transcendental.
yeah, totally.
So this is this your idea of the I don't know, where are we in this discussion? Where's the
Yeah, we're just kind of jumping all over the place. I mean,
yeah.
Mostly like, I've interacted a little bit on, kind of mailing lists and Twitter a little bit with other people who, are more professionally involved with PCT, but this is the first time I'm just in a free form conversation with somebody. So I'm like, oh, have you heard of this? Have you heard? These are all related to the thing. Like, you should check them out. Tell me what you think. And that's kind of very much my energy a lot in general, like I try to write book summaries sometimes, but I basically gave up a couple years ago. I was like, I don't know how to write a book summary. Like I can't do it. I try and I'm like, no, you should just read the thing. It's so good. Like, I don't want to try to smoosh it, and so instead I try to get people to read books by just raving excitedly about them. And talking about what they seem connected to. It's like, hey, this thing relates to this thing, and like, and then
I see you doing that on Twitter.
Yeah. So this is me doing that, but in the opposite direction. I'm like, oh, you know about PCT? Check out all these other things.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right, because if there's some truth to it, there's other people finding ways to the same truth.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're connected with Method of Levels, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're maybe even do Method of Levels.
No, I'm so I'm an assistant professor, and I'm teaching. I'm teaching clinical skills, also training Method of Levels at times. So in combination with Warren Mansell and my Dutch colleagues, cool. And I'm talking and thinking a lot about Method of Levels. But also as a way to understand PCT. This goes both ways.
Yeah. So
have you tried something about it? Have you?
Well, so the other connection I just wanted to make is that I haven't really tried Method of Levels. I mean, I went and watched one of maybe Warren's videos. Somebody in Australia had some videos, and I went and watched one or two of them, and I tried like a little bit of like, okay, notice. Hey, I just had a thought about my thoughts. What's going on there? And kind of noticing that. But I haven't like really dived into it. But I think one thing that is cool is coherence therapy is another transdiagnostic therapy methodology. Mm-hmm. It's like, literally on the mailing list, like yesterday or something, somebody was like, do we have a flexible sequence of steps like low self-esteem or for other disorders like depression? I asked because I found it helps to have steps for, you know, anxiety or depression. And then, you know, one of the core people from the coherence therapy just replied like, sequences of specific steps are not defined in coherence therapy as a rule because any one sequence would fit and be effective for only a small fraction of clients. Like the therapist has to learn how to apply the methodology, you know, in like any predefined steps would only be one example of how it might work. Like, so it's very much, I see, like, I watched a half-hour presentation that maybe Warren gave on YouTube a couple of years ago, or well, gave to some people in person, but it was up on YouTube, that was talking about the transdiagnostic thing. And I was struck just talking with you now, like, oh yeah, that's one thing that method of levels and coherence therapy really have in common. Like, I think in some sense, the two practices might be, I don't want to say the same exactly, but like, I could imagine a scenario where somebody is in some sense using both really thoroughly at the same time, and that would be super cool.
Yeah. So the way it sounds, it's like they also work from principles, which is great to do if you know the principles.
Yeah.
So, like that's the thing that's lacking in, for example, CBT, because they don't have principles. You need to have all the programs for different types and. You can't say, well, this is the principle. I know how it is. I feel if I'm doing well or not.
And the main thing I would say that the coherence therapy models would add that PCT doesn't currently have is that some of the control systems that run through the really strongly emotionally activated parts of the brain are, as far as neuroscience research has been able to tell, and you know, clinical stuff backs this up, they're not permanently hardwired, but they are kind of by default, they're much harder to change than other control systems. Like they have a much kind of more rapid, like and they, yeah, I don't know. You can read it and check it out, and they talk about some of the details, but it's like pointing at how there's different parts in the chain, and like the existence of these ones being very very rigid unless they get kind of opened up, is particularly true of the emotional brain, like the, you know, amygdala and hippocampus or whatever. And the important implications of this, like, this is why, you know, we can be as clever and as generous and whatever when we're not triggered, and then suddenly we get triggered and a whole bunch of different systems have come online that are just doing completely different stuff. And it's like, why is that, right? Like, so they have a bunch of kind of detailed models about why that is.
And they are.
This is the Coherence Psychology Institute.
The same club. Yeah. This also makes sense from a PCT perspective, right? I don't know if it's. I built upon Powers, but I'm not sure if he did see it the same way. I think that the principles are very much connected with emotions, right? Because you don't reason into principles. It's like a deeper understanding and also a deeper feeling level, whether
right. So it's
right or not.
Yeah.
So for example, if I feel angry, I can be quite sure that that a principle is disturbed.
Right, and everything else kind of flows down from there. Yeah.
Flows down from there?
Well, I mean, if whatever that principle is saying is needed flows down into program sequences, categories, etc.
Yeah. So the whole system starts working to restore control of that principal variable. Yeah. So, but it's like the top down, the top and the bottom are very much connected in that at the principal level.
When you say the top and the bottom,
the top, the control from the top is saying, well, I need to be safe, right? That's the principal level. But the sensations at the bottom make clear that I'm not currently safe, right? So this is where my information comes from, and also where I what is it? I also interact, of course, there to make it safe. When I find out it doesn't work, I find out at the top. It's hard to think when all these systems change, right, at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can paint a picture.
Yeah.
And draw a picture.
Yeah, but it really is all happening. It's all, it's very alive.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that I know from therapy and MOL, that change always involves emotion, like psychological change. Important, significant change can't be done without emotions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why they are very, very much connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So it would be interesting if you try to experience more for MOL for.
Yeah, I will probably check it out at some point. I'm still at the moment on a bit of a kick with the coherence therapy stuff. Like I'm one of the many things that I do in my life is something like life coaching, and I've recently convinced some of the coherence therapy folks. I don't know if "convinced" is quite the right term, but
if you want to be doing that, yeah.
I recently inspired some of them, I guess, to give sell, but to train me and some friends in coherence coaching, which is pretty much the same methodology in terms of like how you're relating to people and their schemas, but it's not coming from a basis of doing therapy, which has its whole licensure stuff and it's just all of that. It's just coming from a place of like, well, how do you have conversations with people that will help them notice what's going on in their systems and help them untangle inner conflicts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, even there, it's like, I remember when I first read the PCT books back at the start of 2017, and I was just like, whoa, the only problem is inner conflict. I mean, it's not like quite literally true, but there's a sense in which it's like, there's a sense in which you wouldn't have any problems if you could always consistently resolve your inner conflicts like thoroughly, properly, internally, because you would just have whatever problems you'd have, and you'd be doing whatever you could be doing the best you could to sort them all out, and you would be feeling as in control as you in fact were, and that would, you might not have everything you wanted, but like you would not feel like bad.
Yeah.
I mean, bad is sort of a nebulous word here, but there's like, I don't know. Yeah, it's.
But I haven't met anyone who both knows PCT and or MOL or any kind of way to notice things and is able to live that way. Right?
Yeah.
You cannot. I don't think we can expect to have a life without conflict, or a life where all the conflicts are like organically resolved.
So some of the meditation friends that I've talked to like claim that this is what enlightenment is.
Yeah. Just to be able to transcend every conflict.
Yeah. So basically, like if it's really obvious that most people, their control systems have a whole bunch of tangles in them, basically, like situations where they systematically are kind of doing a thing that works a little bit but doesn't work enough, and so they still have the problem, but they don't have a good strategy to do a different thing, and
there's
things
this other thing
with the other
thing.
And the whole idea of introspection is scary because they have some other control system that says it's not okay to feel too much things, or like they're just all tangled up, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good explanation of human experience. Yeah.
Right. And so the idea that one could be like, so there's sort of two things, and they're kind of one thing, but like you can point at it from two directions. Like one is just like, what would it look like to have a really well organized control hierarchy in a given person at a given moment, right? Like where and obviously that's going to be contextually dependent, right? Like that's not, that's partially a function of the society that they're in or whatever. Like if your control system is only wired to speak English and Dutch, and like you find yourself marooned in China, like that is not a very well organized control system in some like object level sense, like some material sense. But even there's still something huge that happens if you don't have, control systems that say something like, if I try to get what I want, I will be punished, right? Like if you've got some sort of schema like that, well, you're going to have a hard time, right? Like you're going to have a hard time with everything.
So there's this difference, like the first one you described, I imagine like a martial arts master. They have this powerful control, right? Within that setting. Not necessarily on all the settings, but well, you can witness control there. And the other one, if the control systems are like blocked by, I think if you have this idea of, if you do something, if I want something, I will be punished, you impact overall control, right? You cannot you break your own system.
If another cool way to point at this would be something like, so consider a martial artist who thinks they can't dance and thinks if they dance they'll be laughed at, but like they're actually quite a good martial artist. Consider on the other hand somebody who's not that embodied, like they're not super coordinated or whatever, but they feel a sense of like, I love dancing, it's just free, it's fun, I don't care what I look like or whatever. If you set those two people to dance, the person who is actually in some sense less coordinated, like has less skill in some sense, is probably going to dance better than the other person who's going to be all tripping over themselves trying to whatever. So anyway, where was I going with this? Right. So there's sort of like, there's always going to be new conflicts that arise just in situations, right? Like, you're driving to a show and the detour shows up and you've now got to decide, do I want to be at the show late or do I want to not go? Right. And just, okay, well, that was beyond your control. You are now in a situation that you had not planned and you got to like decide this. But there's like some people upon encountering that decision would go, oh crap. They'd be, I should have left earlier. And like, and they'd be like all tangled up in problems. And those problems might make them more late, or they might make them speed and get in a crash, which is not, speeding is not intrinsically wrong. It's one way to resolve this problem. You're just like, well, I will push my error into probability of dying. And like, that's, given that I have no meta like fully satisfying solution that I can generate here. Or they might just say, well, I'm going to decide to be late. But the point is like the difference between somebody who, when they encounter a conflict, they go, oh, fuck, versus somebody who encounters a conflict and goes, I guess I'll be late, or encounters a conflict and goes, I don't think it really makes sense to show up late. I'm going to go out for dinner instead. Or, maybe they spend many minutes or in a less immediate case, many hours thinking about what they're going to do, right? So it's not about like just instantly knowing what you're going to do. You might need to do the math, right? Like just,
it has to do with this idea of expanded or contracted awareness. That's something about being able to see all the possibilities and have a choice be made, or try this one or this one or this one, and staying stuck in there.
Right, or kind of oscillating back and forth, like somebody who is like speeding half the time, and then they're like, "Oh God, I'm going too fast!" Right? Like,
oh, this happens all the time. Right? It's a very normal experience to have this. Not just speeding per se, but.
And so it seems to me that like, you can't get rid of conflict, but you could. There's nothing impossible. It's merely difficult. There's nothing impossible about organizing all of your sort of meta level systems so that instead of getting all in an extra jumble when you have a conflict, you kind of just do the sanest thing as far as you can tell.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. It's like what happens if I know I'm paying too much for something, and then I just think, well, the difference between paying too much and all the effort needed to pay exactly the right amount is like 10 euros. Why bother, right? It's a higher level perspective of what's actually wrong in this situation.
Right. Yeah.
So the idea is to is this a one of your goals, like to become that kind of human, or to
I would say
like
so, and to help other people figure out how to do that too. And so I see PCT as like such a powerful, like, fundamental foundational map for what this thing even means. Like, right, if you're trying to talk about resolving internal conflict or something without a map like that, so what do you mean internal conflict, and why is it bad, and like, you know, why can't you just win, you know, and and how would you go about resolving it in some sort of not exactly principled way, but some sort of consistent, fluid way, maybe. You know, because there's times when you know, the conflicts get resolved really quickly, right? Like, you know, you go to open the door, it's locked, you got to get your key out, but in order to get your key out, you need to take your backpack off, and you're like, oh, okay, well, I thought I wouldn't have to put this down to open the door, but I guess I do have to put it down to open the door. So I'm gonna put it down, I'm gonna open it. Like, that's an example of like, it just fluidly happens, right? And it could sort of all be that fluid, basically.
And for that purpose, it helps to have a sense of the levels of where the conflict is happening, right? This is something at the program level. Do I need to know why I'm doing this? Do I need to get into meaning, or does it have to do with the way you view the world, and maybe you have to change your sense of reality?
Right. And it's like, if I view putting the dishes away as a chore versus as a dance, it's like I have a totally different experience of putting the dishes away.
Does it consistently work in your household?
Yeah, I mean, I just yesterday morning or something, I went and picked up some groceries, and then I came back and I was like putting the groceries away and putting some dishes away, I think, like listening to some music, and I was just like, each movement was just like it was sort of the thing I was attending to was like, how it's like almost like, it's like, how can this experience of putting away the dishes be really fluid and graceful and satisfying and joyous and musical, right? In the context of listening to this stuff. And that may not be, in some sense, the most efficient, but I'm actually not sure that it's not in another sense, because it's like, you know, compared to if you're moving in a more jerky way, it's like, it may seem like you're getting more efficient, tight movement in a sort of Taylorist sense, but you might not actually be getting as much movement per calorie, because you might be burning extra calories fighting your own self, trying to whatever, as opposed to like,
so this might be a way to apply this knowledge in our daily life, right? To find where am I somehow stuck? Where's the conflict? And then that, like your idea of a dance is, it's a way to rise above that, right? It's not about the dance per se, but dancing is a way to solve something, to solve the annoying chore part of doing the dishes.
Well, and it transforms it too, because it's like, if part of why putting away the dishes sucks, like often I think people get stuck in this thing where they're like, I shouldn't have to do this. And I don't know exactly what type of, I don't know how exactly I'd map that onto PCT, but like, definitely the hardest times to motivate myself are when, for whatever reason, I have a sense of I shouldn't have to do this. This should be somebody else's job. I shouldn't have this problem in the first place. Whatever. Because that's a very direct conflict with however you'd go about solving it. If you think you shouldn't have to do it, it's like, no solution that requires you to enact it feels acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever you do, the conflict remains.
Yeah.
As long as you think you don't have to do it. Yeah. 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 So even if you devise a dishwashing robot, it's still in conflict, right? Because you shouldn't have to design that robot.
Yeah, why is it my job to design the?
Yeah.
Geez, somebody should have just made this.
Yeah. So the way up, and this is a method of levels way of looking of things is you try to see both perspectives in the same frame. So you have the dishes, the thing you need to do, and then all the perceptions have to do with not having to do the dishes. So you explore those. Well, my time is valuable. Someone else should do this. Make a mess of things. All those perceptions. You get them in the same frame.
Yeah.
And then look at it, and that's the transformation step.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because first you are in either one of those sides, right? You're in,
and being able to see them both at the same time is they'll transform themselves if they can properly see each other. Like you don't have to impose.
No, yeah.
So this is like exactly the same as coherence therapy, and so it's like I'm like so. Slightly different language. I mean, I'm sure different tools in the toolkit, different emphases on different things. Like, my sense is that method of levels might be in some ways even less direct than coherence therapy is. Like, coherence therapy is in some ways very direct. It's like it goes straight for the thing. It's like, okay, you are feeling aware in this moment of like why you exhibited this behavior in some other time. Like, it makes sense to you that you did this behavior. Not. The language is all fuzzy. It's not like it makes sense to you cognitively, but you are imagining this scene and you know you had to do this. Yeah. The person's like, yeah. It's like, what that means is that in a simulated way, the whole control hierarchy is live in the room right now.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, we can just chase the train back up. Like, imagine that you are in that scene and you don't take this action. What happens, right? Like what bad thing results, right? Like directly is like basically performing the control system test, right? Like they're like, what are you controlling for there? It's like, oh, well, if I don't do this, then like I will experience like everybody hating me. It's like, okay. Yeah. And then how do you know that? So that seems like a thing that's worth not having. And then you can explore, like, why do you think everybody will hate you if you do this? Like, where does that knowing come from, right? And yeah,
it's interesting to explore this further. How these, how MOL and coherence therapy overlap.
Yeah.
I think, well, MOL in its essence is really simple. It's in one way very simple and in one way very complicated because you have to leave lots of things out. Yeah.
The list of things that you need to not do in order to do method of levels is longer than the list of things you need to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to send some PCT resources to actually, hang on a sec before I get into this. I'm just going to